Hello, this is Warpath 1985 speaking. In today's video/review, I shall be discussing the Transformers Legacy Insecticons. Not the deluxe versions that were released a little bit later into Legacy, but also Age of the Primes. But primarily, the Legacy Insecticons from the first 2 years of Legacy. Now, maybe like curious as to why I'm not gonna discuss the later release deluxe Insecticons. You know, I did actually review technically one of them in the last year's Halloween special. I guess like last year's Halloween special. But yes, I think was last year. I don't know. But generally, I reviewed the Creature Supply, the 4-pack that included Ransack, the first Legacy Deluxe Insecticon that we got. Later on, we will get who was it? The other two like Insecticons from the Deluxe series, or Deluxe Insecticons, and we'll be getting like Venom later this year. And if you're curious, like if I have any of those figures, no, I do not. Especially Venom, who's still up on pre-order and will come out until next month, I think. So yeah. For now, these are all the Insecticons that I have. And aside from that, for history-wise, the Insecticons obviously first appear in the Season 1 of Transformers, and also the earlier, technically, not as like super early, but very much into late 1984, so that's early 1985. It was very consistent, mind you, of the Generation 1 Marvel Comics. That's comics, but comic. Those appeared in Dreamwave, Beat Generation 1, IDW, Prime, and technically line continuity as well. But also, technically, they were kind of a lot more different in those that general line continuity, because most of them didn't retain their original names. Like Sharpnel lost his name, trademark, or his trademark, so it became Shrapnel, and Bombshell became Hardshell, which also led to the character Hardshell, Transformers Prime, who is not really Hardshell from War for Cybertron, not for Cybertron, but Fall for Cybertron, and also the comic book as well. They're actually completely different characters, I believe, which makes sense for the most part, because I believe in the comic book they just decided to just call him Bombshell, I believe, in the IDW 2005 series, and also the line continuity / post Prime season miniseries. Though that's pretty much it for that. They would technically appear in Cyberverse. However, all of them were Shrapnel recolors, and they still returned their names, I believe. Like we had Bombshell and Shrapnel, but I don't know if that one was named Kickback and or not Ransack. It was the other guy, who is usually nowadays a retool of Shrapnel, because there's 4 reissues that have been released the past, like, I believe 20 years. Either be the Takara release versions with the nice white box. We also get like a Decepticon clone version, which we base off the Diaclone versions of the Decepticon molds, and we also will get later released Hasbro version, and then a Platinum version, which is the same version as those previous ones I mentioned before, but then packaging like the other ones. And finally, we'll get the Retro Collection version, which I do have 2 out of 3 Insecticons from the Retro Collection. Retro Collection, the Treasures of the Movie one. I still don't have Kickback, because I wanted to get Kickback and I almost got him at Walmart, but I passed on him because I decided to get Cloud Cover instead, which I don't regret, because I really like Cloud Cover. It's not that bad of a figure, since the general design of the Seeker has a similar value to me, which I'll get to that a little later when I review that figure and also a few other Seekers. And finally, we'll get probably the most accurate and probably the best versions out of the Decepticons of modern era Transformers engineering and toy lines. That being the legacy versions, which are still flawed, mind you, but they are significantly better than the previous versions, which were, in my personal opinion, very tiny and very spindly. Although it did work for like Transformers Devastation, and also Transformers Devastation G1 and the Marvel comic, where the Decepticons had the ability to mass shift for the most part, where they'll shrink and sometimes grow in size. Which is also the reason why I really like the Decepticons for myself, because I really like the boss fights in Terror Devastation. There's also, once again, for big games, Pretty Devastation, a few others. But generally, that is pretty much it for the Decepticons themselves. But for figures, which I'll talk about right now, the figures, a little strange. Kickback was the first general figure that got retooled into a separate character, that being Ransack, who came with a unique head, that being a G1 colored, sass painted Kickback head, however. It looks pretty good, if you're curious what it looks like. It's the G1 head. It's a very nice head sculpt and general paint job. But unfortunately, Kickback, we do only figure out 3 to receive such an upgrade. However, for accessories, Kickback did receive exactly 3 accessories. 2 of them were technically for a failed / cancelled Energon monster, apparently. I only ever heard of from that toy guy who's pretty much in touch with Mark and etc. from the design team, from Legacy and most of Transformers that are being produced nowadays, which Mark did. This is was part of the design team to produce the first wave of Legacy. However, I'm unsure of that Energon monster gimmick. We did receive like a couple of concept art pieces here and there of like Straxus and etc. who were cancelled from Legacy Year 1, but whatever. So I'm fine with it. But he does come with 2 swords. Energon swords, mind you. Energon wing blades. Look very nice. They can both combine into a much larger sword with these 2 little 5mm ports. I just find the areas where to combine with. I don't know. Find like this more massive, almost like a, not axe, but more it's just like a larger blade. It's very interesting. Looks real nice, but it is very goofy in the figure's hand. You can fit in there like that, or like this, or store on the 2 wings, or like I was earlier. And also, the blades all form the thorax of the locust mode. Technically the grasshopper mode, but he technically does turn to a locust, kind of. Ransack turns into a proper locust, while Kickback turns to like a grasshopper. The second accessory that he came with was his little machine gun / blaster. It's very tiny, very small. Inspired by his G1 blaster. Has some nice paint detail. But for articulation and lost gimmicks, so he has movable antenna for transformation. Same with wings. A non-movable or totally movable cockpit, which was originally supposed to be movable but was cancelled. I believe this was like mentioned in a live stream or something, or by Mark once again, because he usually reveals like much as expresses like, oh, what we did get rid of or what we had to take away, where the cuts due to budget. I believe we mentioned like some sort of post about like the cockpit. If not, it's unfortunate that it's non-movable. But the articulation figure is very, very, very good, but also very simple. He has a ball joint at the head, hinge elbows and shoulders and swivels. Very nice elbow because of the transformation. Technically can move his wrist up and down for sword posing, but it's because of the transformation once again. Nice waist joint. Very nice kick, both forward and back. Very nice knee bend. And a perfect ankle tilt. And also forward, a little bit back. Comes a foot articulation. Articulate toe. And also from a thigh cut. So yeah, he has very good articulation, which is perfect because Kickback is, I don't know, it's more fitting for him to be a lot more lithe because he turns to a grasshopper, so obviously be a lot more lithe and acrobatic than the others, but yeah, it's pretty good. But for Sharpnel, would serve as the base figure for Bombshell. And then 2 other Insecticons, I forget their name. I'm quite ashamed that I forgot their name, because the only Decepticons I consistently remember their name would be Venom and Ransack. But yeah, the 2 I always forget. I don't know why. But Sharpnel only comes with, once again, 3 accessories. 2 of them are very parts formery, because the 2 of them little like purple blasters actually form the feet of the beetle, but the other one is a nice homage to the original blaster, which I do have the retro collection version, which is the latest version of this G1 Insecticon mold. So they do look very good together. But also, he keels over a little blaster. I can tell it's very faithful to the original mold, but it takes a lot of liberties. However, unlike the G1 version, would have had the opening cockpit for the little Micromans or Microman, this one is similar to Kickback, where it's actually pretty much stuck in there, but this time it's actually molded shut and cannot be moved. Like, clearly there's an interior in there, even though it's molded in there and not really full interior. But yeah, it's just a solid piece and cannot be moved because it's an insert. Technically. For articulation, it's better in some areas, but worse in others. Like, he only has a swivel at the head, hinged elbows. Technically, he moved the mandibles. Not technically mandibles, more like horns. But they can be used as mandibles by the beetle, if caught correctly. Beetle logic is very confusing. I'm a marine biologist, so beetles kind of still a little foreign to me, but yeah. Has a very nice elbow bend. It's not as deep as Kickback, but it's still pretty good. Sole at the bicep. Hands can move inwards and outwards because of transformation. Waist rotation. Legs can move forward and back. Nice split. A pretty good knee bend, which is slightly deeper than Kickbacks. And a very limited ankle rocker. And before it is very limited as well, but has really good back, but is hindered by the heel. So yeah, the articulation of Sharpnel is very limited, but since Sharpnel is a lot more hefty of a character, not as hefty as Bombshell, which is perfectly fine with his somewhat limited articulation, but Well, Sharpnel feels a little bit more limiting because he is the leader, so I'm gonna get into some leader poses. So it's unfortunate that he's probably technically the most limited, but not as limited as Bombshell because he's somewhat even more limited. But yeah, I'm okay with his limited circulation, but it is like a problem. Other people kind of treat him as like it's the worst thing ever. For me, I'm kind of like, it's okay. It's better than nothing, because I much prefer the legacy mold over the original one, technically, because the original one a little more because of its charm, but also the Generations mold, which is, I don't know, I just never liked the Generation molds. They were so lanky, and I always feel like I'm gonna break them. So I have a lot of quite large hands, so it makes it even worse. So we also have Bombshell, who once again has his cockpits stuck in there, but for some reason, because again it's still glued on there, it can be moved, but if I recall correctly, it's just like a flat surface. So yeah, unfortunate, but whatever. So Bombshell is very interesting. Okay, see, yeah, she has once again 3 accessories like the other 2. Technically, like 1 more, but this piece is kind of hard to remove. That being his Cerebral Shell launcher. But yeah, it has his 2 little rocket launchers, or technically wrist mounted guns. They're very between sources, either they're rocket launchers or wrist mounted guns. Like, once again, I have the G1 Retro Collection figure. They're just wrist mounted guns. On the G1 Retro Collection figure size mold, which looks pretty good, but also shows off how all of this is still inaccurate. At least you do get that robot mode a lot more accurate colors in this purple one, because again, you kind of choose one or the other. I think it's still kind of like fixed up, but whatever. There would be like some MP10 levels of complex tomfoolery. So as it gets Little Blaster, which once again, a somewhat faithful update to the original blaster. However, it is very stubby. Kind of has that Hound blaster effect, where the original one is kind of more like a rifle. This one's kind of more like a little stubby pistol. Like the original one is still pretty stubby, but this one, man, it is teeny tiny. We also took some liberties as well. Snaps of the cartoon version, which also took a lot of liberties. But for articulation, it's kind of interesting. I'll get to the QC issue with this mold. I don't know why, but my figure always kind of like had a tough time holding on to this hand. I tried many like different remedies, but it still like falls off pretty easily. But for articulation, this figure is the same as Sharpnel, but both more limited and better in certain areas. It's very confusing. Like for example, because of the Cerebral Shell launcher and general the head, it can't really move that far from side to side. But you can move the Cerebral Shell launcher up and down because it's transformational, both on the actual plate and also the little, not proboscis, it's actually something else. I think it's proboscis, I can't remember, because again, I'm not really that versed into insectoids and etc. Which is very similar to the G1 version, where you could also move the little Cerebral Shell launcher like so. So it's very similar to the G1 version because it's details, but slightly less exaggerated in certain areas. Like the Cerebral Shell launcher is a lot more stocky and shorter, like the cartoon, but the plate feels like it's a lot bigger. I think because the head feels smaller, it's a lot more spaced out. I don't know. It's weird. But yeah, the same articulation as Sharpnel. but technically a lot more in the shoulders for some reason. It feels limited, but also more. It's so weird. I was gonna have that QC issue, which is really annoying. More hinges, more swivels, and also the wrist that pops off really easily. So the hand. Got a waist swivel. Nice kick forward and back in that split. Same knee bend, same limited ankle rocker, and foot forward and back. So yeah, the figure is pretty good visually, but overall it's very like limiting when it comes to circulation. I think it could be like done a lot better, but the figure is most certainly not on the level of that of Kingdom, Scorponok, and Kingdom tracks, where there's so many different falls that it's different, like a 50-50 if you like it or not. I personally really like both of the molds, but I still find like a lot of problems with them. Like we mentioned this in my first review ever with Sandstorm. It's a very janky mold when it comes to the Scorponok mold. It works, but it's very janky. And also same for tracks, which I had a normal like tracks, had no problems whatsoever, but it still has like that weird I don't know, like chintzy feel. But generally all the world mods for their Decepticons are actually pretty good. They look awesome together. The only problem with this is, again, I wish they could have done a lot more, like increasing some of the circulation points here and there. Maybe give Sharpnel better like just sculpting around this like upper torso. Because a lot of people point out, like, once again, I agree with them as well, the upper torso looks kind of weird. It is accurate to the cartoon, but I feel like it's which was a lot more the Devastation model. It's a lot more bulky. Alright, so let's go on to the transformation for these figures. Now, each individual figure obviously has some slight differences between one another, because they all turn into at least something different when it comes to being an insect. However, two of them obviously share the same mold, since they are retools, or technically just one's retool of the other. But let's start off with the simplest one, which will be, well, Kickback. Now, Kickback is obviously well known to be the simplest out of all the Decepticons to transform, mainly just because it is essentially the original figure's transformation, which I did have at one point, but unfortunately that figure is broken. Very sad. Where it simply is just flip out the legs, fold out the front legs, technically fill out the back legs, hind legs, whatever, and fold out the front legs, and you're pretty much done. Obviously there's some other steps here and there, as you can see, but generally the transformation is very quick, smooth, and has nothing really difficult, or something that might hinder enjoyment value, pretty much anything with it. The only problem with it is not even the fault of the figures, much as the fault of the the kind of sort of the design of Kickback would be, it's just is very limiting when it comes to his articulation, or even just limits the articulation of warp mode. But you kind of have to put those like hind legs with the front legs somewhere, so it's a okay type of a sacrifice, to be honest. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Kickback. Nothing particularly special, nothing particularly complex, just that's Kickback. But Sharpnel is very much a similar affair. However, his transformation is a lot more complex when compared to his original, which I do once again also have with the Retro Collection movie version. However, obviously both Sharpnel and Bombshell shared the same mold, particularly that being the lower torso / the legs / the crotch. Now, this is very interesting, as you can see here, is that this transformation is a lot more complex. It is generally kind of has to be, because most Transformers turns to a beetle or into a technically larger, bulkier insect. They kind of have a hard time turning from robot into insect mode or beetle mode. for the most part, because you don't know where to put most of the mass of the beetle. Thankfully, since it is a G1 design, you don't really have to worry about that. But more realistic designs, such as technically Venom, not Venom. It's a hard shell. I can't remember his name, but he's a Decepticon and turns into a lot more of a accurate beetle. However, with Bombshell, it's a lot more difficult. This is mainly due to how Bombshell, obviously my favorite has a QC issue where his hand falls off, but Bombshell, however, has a tougher time, mainly due to how the transformation really goes, because it's reversed from Sharpnel, because you actually have to put the arms on the inside instead of the outside for much more of a rounder beetle bow, technically. So yeah, it is pretty interesting to see it, but you have to be very careful, because you might stress the plastic, because of this piece right here. Like we just push in there like so, and you might get the feeling that you might break it, or even like just shear the peg off, but nothing really bad's gonna happen. But it does feel like you're gonna have to, like, either someday, however, it's gonna stress the plastic real bad. But yeah, you just like shove it in there to form the hind legs of the what's called the very monstrous beetle mode. I can't remember the exact names for most beetles. I mean, because I don't really remember, this isn't my forte when it comes to arthropods and vertebrates, whatever. But yeah, that's in this little beetle mode. Very simple transformation for all three of them. But yeah, that's all for the transformation. But for the beast modes themselves, it is a lot more interesting, to say the least. So obviously all of these figures have some sort of cost cutting here and there. In particular, the first version, or the first instance we got to see this, was with the Ransack / Kickback mold, where although yes, they have some of the original gimmicks, including add-on ones with brand new thoraxes which weren't there before. And also some munching action with both of the heads. It's pretty cool. The canopies don't not work, which does suck, but we don't really know as to why, but it was just cut for budget. That's all we really know, it's just cut for budget, or maybe the gimmick just fell out of favor. We aren't sure. All we know is that these canopies are just stuck in place. They can be moved, mind you, with some minor finagling and generally just shaving, breaking, etc. But generally, it's a little bit too risky for me. However, Sharpnel is a lot more easier in the sense that he's only just a couple of screws. You can pop out the little insert here, but it's just insert and doesn't really have that much interior when compared to the G1 version, which I do have here with the Retro Collection version, where it has a little seat for a Microman, or technically a Raru, I think they're called. I forget what they're called, but they're enemies of the Microman. But generally, the vehicle mode / insect mode / beast mode of Sharpnel is very faithful to the original version. However, he does require some parts morphing for the arms / legs here, which is a bummer, but it works for me. It doesn't really bother me compared to other viewers. Like, I think Dr. Lalda mentioned that it really bothered him, but to me it's like, I'm fine with it. I can legitimately live with it. And also, yes, the mandibles are articulated, and the wings, etc., antennae are articulated on the Kickback mold. For Bombshell, since he's just a simple retool of, not a simple retool, but heavy retool of Sharpnel, he has a lot more gimmicks, technically. If you are able to first remove the pin, unscrew it, and then shave off the peg that's keeping this panel in place, because it does technically have a space for something, but not really deep enough for it to be anything substantial for like a headmaster. But generally, this is a movable panel. It's just you have to modify it. He also has, once again, hind legs, which are technically removable as parts for me. But since these are Bombshells as wrist rockets, technically, then we need to be parts formed. In the case for his canopy, once again, virtual version opens up, New version does open up, we have to modify it. And generally, articulation here with the cerebral shell launcher. And that's pretty much it for all of them. All three of them are really simple molds, and technically not real molds. Technically, two of them are very simple molds, and they're all technically easily obtainable, especially in the case with Ransack and Sharpnel. Not Sharpnel, but Kickback. However, Sharpnel and Bombshell are a little bit harder to find and more or less more expensive, and especially since they're a part of Transformers Evolution, where that whole tournament was just a absolute nightmare to collect. Bombshell is the hardest to find overall, but none of them really are that expensive for the most part, especially since Sharpnel is a lot easier to find than Sharpnel, but Kickback is the easiest one to find because it's released in both single and also 2-packs. Sharpnel is a little bit easier also because it was on deep discount for the most part, but Bombshell is the hardest one because a lot of people want to keep their collections as groups, so it meant that he was just the one that was just generally the hardest to find both in stores and online. I was looking to find him at TFCon 2024. Not sure now, but I do believe that there is still some available at some stores. But aside from this, that's all from this review. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hopefully I shall see you next time. Bye.